Welcome to the Birding for Joy podcast, a show about discovering and exploring all the ways birding and wild birds bring joy into our lives. I'm Candi Lynn Fite, your gracious host and joyful birder. If you're curious about learning more about birding for joy, grab your favorite beverage, settle on your perch, and let's get into today's episode. Hello, birdiful friends. If you've listened to Birding for Joy before, welcome back. If this is your first time tuning in, I am so happy you're here. First, let me apologize for the delay in this week's episode due to a couple of personal reasons. Even for us podcasters, sometimes life happens. Also, please ignore my scratchy voice. Ragweed, one of my biggest allergens, is plentiful here and very healthy from our recent rains. Today is the second part of biodiverse habitats for birds. Last week, we discussed the importance of creating habitats for birds and other wildlife. I mentioned several reasons why humans need to step up and support nature. If you or someone you know experiences eco-anxiety or feel paralyzed by fear and frustration about what is happening to our environment and ecosystems around the globe, there is one surefire way to help alleviate those feelings. Create change. Even if it's on a small level, every little bit helps, and your efforts will not go unnoticed by nature. So if you missed last week, I encourage you to go back and listen to the episode titled, "We Can Do Hard Things for the Birds." This week, we'll focus on how to create biodiverse and sustainable habitats that will not only support our beloved feathered friends, but other wildlife as well. Our gardens can become bird sanctuaries with some effort and intentional practice. I use the word garden in the title of this episode for the searchable purpose. So when I say the word garden in the episode, that includes any piece of land, such as front yards, backyards, side lots, front meadows, yardens, a patch of unused yard, or maybe lawn that you want to transform. But say you don't have a yard. That's okay. These practices we'll talk about today can be done on a much smaller level, on a front or back porch, a balcony, or even a series of potted plants on the patio. Remember, whatever your effort to support nature might be, nature will always notice. And one other thing to keep in mind, you don't have to be a green-thumbed gardener to help the birds. Maybe you team up with your neighbors to create a biodiverse habitat between your spaces. Work together using whatever resources you have in the area. If I've learned anything in my 20-plus years of gardening, and most recently learning about the wildlife on our property, is if you offer it, they will come. Now let's consider the four main requirements of a bird-friendly habitat: food, water, shelter or cover, and places to rest, nest, and raise young. Every living thing on this planet requires food. For birds specifically, this might be insects, nuts, berries, fruit, seeds, sap, or nectar. Insects are extremely important in this list due to the fact that 96% of all land birds, even the nectar-loving hummingbirds, feed their young insects, which are packed with protein, moisture, and other vital nutrients. So when you're considering what plants to incorporate into your habitat, think like a wildlife lover and not a gardener. Bird-friendly gardens need bugs. A valuable resource for all kinds of insects is deadwood. A deadwood pile can be kept in a back corner of the area. Your deadwood pile will double as a shelter space. As for plants, insects want the plants, trees, shrubs, grasses, and vines specific to their ecoregion. I'm talking about native plants. Ecoregion-specific native plants are the foundation of any healthy biodiverse landscape garden, or habitat. The logic behind this is that most birds rely on insects. The insects rely on plants, and the bird insect plant connection in any given area has a mutualistic relationship they've been working with one another for hundreds or sometimes thousands of years. Side note, while it's true some insects and birds also utilize non native plants, for the sake of this podcast and not wanting to start a native versus non native debate, I'll refer to those I'm learning from. If you'd like to do further research on the benefits of natives and wildlife, I suggest Doug Tallamy's books, Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope, which I will list in the show notes. Other than insects as a food source, you can plant native nectar plants along with berry, fruit, seed, or nut-producing plants, shrubs, and trees. If you've ever witnessed an American goldfinch munching on dried flower heads of purple coneflowers or sunflowers, you will discover the willpower to leave them standing once they've gone to seed. One super great resource I've enjoyed exploring is the Audubon Native Plant Database. You plug in your zip code and voila! You have not only a list of region-specific native plants, but you can also purchase them directly from the site. There are several of these sites that can provide you with plant choices. Another favorite of mine is the National Wildlife Foundation's Plant Finder. I will add these links to the show notes. Going back to the Audubon's database, here's an example. The first plant that appears in my list is the American beautyberry, Calicarpa americana. How do I know that this is for sure a region-specific native? Well, because it grows in the woods near my home. It's a deciduous shrub that grows between 3 to 5 foot with an open growth habit. Once it leaves out in the spring, tiny pink flowers appear that attract butterflies and caterpillars. In the early fall, the shrub produces clusters of bright purple berries. The berry buffet feeds many creatures, but as for the birds, the American beautyberry attracts various wrens, orioles, sparrows, warblers, American robins, and cedar waxwings. The second important necessity for a bird habitat is water. Like food, birds need water. Aside from drinking, many bird species enjoy a refreshing bath. Providing water can be done in many ways, such as a bird bath, a shallow dish, a water feature, or a fountain, and consider yourself very lucky if you happen to have a pond, creek, lake, or river on your property. As for positioning your water feature, I've read conflicting information from my sources, so let's take a moment to discuss placement, because where you put your water feature really does matter. Safety comes first. Ideally, you want to place it above the ground and near something like a small tree or shrub for the birds to perch and dry. I've read some information that says putting a bird bath too close to sheltering shrubbery makes birds vulnerable to predators such as a lurking cat or a larger bird of prey. It's best to use your discretion when it comes to how close you place your water feature to vegetation. Now, depth is also important. If your water feature is more than 2 or 2.5 inches, add some large rocks on one side so safety doesn't become an issue for the smaller birds. A bubbler to keep the water moving, either solar or electric, will deter mosquitoes from laying their larvae. In warmer climates, a shadier location will keep the water cooler and the process of algae growth will be slower. During the winter season, you can add a heating element to keep the water from freezing. For those living in the deep south like me, where freezing temperatures don't occur often, you can add a bit of warm water to help break up the ice when it does happen. The key is always having fresh water available every day in all seasons. Now from water, we move on to shelter. Birds are easy prey. They must have areas to retreat to when it comes to hiding from predators or inclement weather. A shelter area can be many things, from trees, shrubs, brush piles, wood stacks, bird boxes, bird houses, tree snags, or dead trees. Pick a spot in your yard where you can be a little messy. Stacks of wood, a branch pile, and leave the leaves. As ecological horticulturist Rebecca McMacken says, they're called leaves for a reason. By the way, she has an excellent TED Talk called Let Your Garden Grow Wild that is so good. I will link it in the show notes. Shelter is a good segue into places to rest, nest, and raise young, because many of the shelter suggestions we've talked about provide both. Trees and larger shrubs are the perfect places for birds to rest, nest, and raise their young. Consider planting in layers, as in taller trees in the back or maybe in the middle, and then adding mid-story trees or shrubs, and then down to lower shrubs, and then plants. Offering a variety of taller trees, mid-story trees, and shrubs in your landscape will create places for the birds in your area to utilize. The more you have, the more birds you will attract. If you're starting from scratch or recreating a space for a more bird-friendly habitat, referring to natives for your region is always a good choice. Don't forget about the online plant finder databases, such as the one on the Audubon website. If you choose to add nest boxes, research what kind of boxes to provide. Okay, so aside from the 4 major components of a bird-friendly habitat, there are a few other things to consider. Number 1, take inventory of your area. Your area might already have several bird-friendly aspects. Number 2, avoid overwhelm. As we like to say in our house, take your time, no rush. Begin with adding a water source, and while you're planning, designing, and planting, put up a feeder or 2. Maybe consider potting up a few natives and then grouping them together. These 3 features will not only attract birds, but they will keep them happy while you're designing. When you're ready to start with the habitat planting, choose one area at a time to focus on. You don't have to do it all in one day, or 1 week, or 1 month. Remember, start small. Number 3, change your mindset about insects. By looking at them as a food source for the birds, it'll be easier to stop using pesticides. If we don't have bugs in the landscape, the birds cannot feed their young. Number 4, keep domestic cats indoors. According to All About Birds, here in North America, cats are the second leading threat to birds after habitat loss. It's estimated that cats kill between 1.3 and 4 billion birds a year. Unfortunately, 69% of those deaths are attributed to feral cats. So, we cat people have to do what we can by keeping our cats inside. Number 5, when designing and planting your vegetation areas, plan for all seasons. Some of us have our resident birds, the birds that do not migrate, but then we also have those birds that migrate to our area to spend the winter. Number 6, be willing to lose some lawn. Rebecca McMacken says, lawns should be area rugs, not wall-to-wall carpet. Number 7, reduce artificial light at night, especially during the migration seasons. Number 8, reduce the threat of window strikes. There are lots of companies that sell decals that break up the reflective glass. Keeping the windows dirty is good, but adding the decals will be better. Number 9, when designing, think of ways to include yourself and your family into that habitat. Plan on an area so that you can connect and spend time with the birds and nature. Add an area for a sit spot, maybe a bench or a small table and chairs tucked away in a shady corner. Connection to place and nature is so important for our mental health. And number 10, research, research, research. There is tons of information out there literally at your fingertips. Utilize these sources to help you achieve your goals. the land, birds, and you will be happier and healthier in the end. Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Maybe you've gathered a few things to help you on this journey to creating a bird-friendly habitat. For me, this is one of the most helpful ways to fight my frustration and anxiety when it comes to thinking about habitat loss, climate change, and the environment. Knowing that I am doing something good that will make a difference in the world and wildlife. Don't forget, I'm going to be adding several links in today's show notes, as well as the title of a few books that have been an inspiration and a wealth of information for me while creating my bird-friendly habitat. Until next week, I wish you well and lots of joyful birding, my friends. If you are enjoying the Birding for Joy podcast, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to the show. Subscribing and tuning in to the episodes lets the algorithm on each platform know the podcast is providing you worthwhile content. It also helps ensure the success of the show. Remember, the absolute best way to support your favorite podcast is by word of mouth. So make sure to share Birding for Joy with others who might enjoy listening. That way we continue to build a joyful birding community. As always, thank you for tuning in and stay chirpy, my friends.